Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author. In this video we're going to talk about the Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security Emergency Operations Plan. So the first thing to get into with this document is that it is essentially a cover plan. It's a broad cover story with which combat plans and operations can be carried out against so-called populations, against the people, as it were, and also against the military, the U.S. military, veterans, and other types of individuals that would be involved in sort of defensive capabilities, right? So the important thing to understand here is that this is not what we're led to believe that it is. And that's what we'll find here in the details, is that their plan is effectively what we're seeing today as part of a build-up. Eventually they are going to execute this plan. They are working right now on the build-up to it. To start with, we're going to go to page 7 to identify the authorship. Now this says it was revised in 2011. It is a long-standing plan, but make no mistake, this is a document which is continuing to be carried out, as we will read in the pages. To begin with, on page 7, it says this EOP, meaning Emergency Operation Plan, is a dynamic document that periodically needs and receives revision. The Director of Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security is responsible for ensuring that the necessary changes to the EOP are conducted, published, and distributed. Plan review and update is done by a multidisciplinary committee. So a committee can no more write a document or a book than it can operate on a person's teeth, or throw a ball, or do any type of activity, really. A committee cannot do these things. So I would suggest that the desire for someone to think that this was written by committee is to give it the appearance of having many people involved. The next section is on page 12, and this is a doozy. A civil disturbance is a planned or random uproar or disturbance of ordinary community life by persons choosing to ignore laws. So, let's see an example of those so-called laws that they're choosing to ignore, right? Because before we get into the nonsensical, sanctified thing, we should actually look at what they say possible civil disturbance could be. Snow emergencies. Those traveling on the roads may subject themselves to arrest. So, here's a scenario. They declare a snow emergency. People go out and start driving during that snow emergency, and thus they declare an emergency of civil disturbance because the people are, quote-unquote, not following the laws by traveling on the roadways. No, they're not selling drugs. No, they're not going around and shooting up buildings. No, they're not attempting to corrupt juveniles or children. No, they're not, just roll out the whole litany of heinous and awful little crimes that they do. most of the time these people are the ones involved in the proliferation of those heinous crimes so that they can have an excuse to exist. But what they really focus on, what they really want, is to ensure that people are not driving when they've declared a snow emergency or really any other emergency. They want to ensure that people do what they're told, obey, sit in their house, and wait to die, essentially. That's what they want. So that is what happens. And let's move on to the next, which will be on page 20. They're what I call layering. The FCEM and HS Assessment Center, that's Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security Assessment Center, is staffed for weather events and is often the first step towards staffing the FCEOC, that's the Franklin County Emergency Operations Command, and calling for a community-wide response. The assessment center also allows the agency to monitor planned activities such as red, white, and boom to ensure the agency is prepared should a response be needed. So, that is layering elements to a third party, and we'll look into that a little bit more in a second. Next, we're going to go to page 22. This is very important. It states exclusion zones, hot or warm zones, and hazardous materials incident annex. Those are terms for that's a different way to phrase what we call a red zone or a green zone, but combat zones, essentially. You go beyond the wire, you should be conditioned for, meaning magazine inserted, bolt forward, round in the chamber, ready to go, right? Ready to rock and roll. They are attempting to set up the term exclusion zone as a combat zone. So basically, when they go beyond the wire, they're going into the exclusion zone, and they better be ready to fight in either a hot or warm zone. And they put it into the hazardous materials incident annex. Yeah, nobody's going to go look there for combat zone procedures. Also, on scene accountability, you have check-in. Only responders requested the scene will be granted access. Interesting. Unity of command. Each individual will be assigned to only one supervisor. This is important to note. Cop cars driving around today some of them have supervisor imprinted on the side of the vehicle. The people that worked at the border post at Eagle Pass all had the term supervisor, the ones who were in charge, right? And in all of the subcontracted contracts for border protection, immigration customs enforcement, sheriffs, highway patrol, police, you name it, they all use the term supervisor. Pretty interesting. Then we go into 23 and 24, which provides us a rather ridiculous conundrum here. A declaration from the Board of Commissioners of Franklin County is a request for all jurisdictions in the county. Declaration process. A declaration will only be accepted by the Ohio EMA from Fairfield County Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Local CEOs. What are local CEOs? That's a chief executive officer in most companies. May decide to declare an emergency. Upon favorable vote by the county commissioners, the resolution will be forwarded to the Ohio EMA by Fairfield County Emergency Management and Homeland Security, declaring Franklin County is under a state of emergency. So they say that they're only going to recognize a declaration from one party, and then there's a large maze for that, but then they talk about upon receipt of the local declaration, prepare requests for small business administration, SBA, home personal property, business loan program if thresholds are met. So that's a way that they're going to generate funding. Prepare to initiate State of Ohio Individual Assistance IA program under Public Assistance PA program if thresholds are met. Upon request of the governor, prepare a request for presidential disaster declaration through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So that's how they're going to fund their occupational control. They're going to use all those elements that were set up for one reason for a different one. So here they're basically saying that the only people that can declare a state of emergency is the Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security. So who exactly are these local declarations, right? That's a question there. And then we also have local CEO. So it can be resolved by the Board of Commissioners or local CEO. This is important. It says sample emergency declaration here. Here it says, be it resolved by the Board of Commissioners, in parentheses, or local CEO. So that's a declaration, Maze, that's important to focus on because that's how they do this stuff. They say, we'll only do it in one capacity, if or but, and then they have all these little things that they hide in there so that those who are reading it aren't the wiser about how they'll actually carry it out. Next, we're going to go to page 28, and here we get their declarations of intent for combat. Under guidance of the Executive Committee, Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security shall implement emergency management for all signatories in Franklin County. So essentially, it doesn't matter if they sign it, these people are going to subsume the names and identities of the signatories. Responsibility to coordinate ongoing activities of emergency management and functions in Franklin County utilizing all available resources, public and private, to combat the effects of a disaster. That's how they declare the intent to combat. They intend to fight, to maintain control, to combat civil disturbances in the form of people driving on the roadways when they've declared a snow emergency. This stuff is insane, right? Lines of succession, and here we're going to get into roles and responsibilities. That's pretty eye-opening and interesting. Assignment of responsibilities. You have local response, the federal or the Franklin County Emergency Operations Center rosters with updated contact information for those tasks in the plan are updated by Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security annually or as changes in personnel warrant. Chief Executives. So these must be the CEOs. They oversee public information regarding the disaster, emergency condition, and recovery operation, authorize special purchasing due to emergency conditions, and authorize the release of emergency public information statements. Who are these chief executives? That's something I want to know. Who are they? Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Coordinate liaison between local, state, and federal agencies. Coordinate damage assessment efforts and disaster funding for citizens, businesses, and governments with state and federal officials. Manage resources and maintain emergency resource database. Coordinate with private industry for use of privately owned resources. Coordinate public information and education. Maintain all aspects of the warning system, whatever that is, and maintain a program for citizen preparedness. That is the Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security. So they give themselves very dumbed down, minute, and mundane roles, but in actuality, they are the command structure of this treason. This is treason. Understand that. This is the constitutional definition of treason, which means engaging in warfare, facilitating enemies by providing them aid and comfort, and etc., etc. We all should know, anyway, the constitutional definition of treason. The operative word being warfare, right? Acts of war, engaging in war. And they included that, they revised into the Constitution that stupid part about requiring 2 or more witnesses and that Congress shall determine the punishment for treason. If you are engaged in warfare and the Constitution requires that the militia deal with it. There's, the Ninth Amendment, you cannot construe one section of the Constitution to disparage other sections of the Constitution, etc. So, coordinate liaison between local, state, and federal agencies. This, who was this one? I think I skipped something, maybe. No, that is the Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security will coordinate liaison between. No, I already read that. Fire services includes fire, code enforcement, and explosive device response. So basically, your fire department people are the ones that are going to be blowing stuff up. Law enforcement includes the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, local police departments, Ohio Highway Patrol, Ohio State University Police, and or other university police. And of course, all of those people are going to be subcontracted security guards, simply wearing the uniform and using the equipment. Security measures include protection of vital facilities. So that's a different word there. Vital facilities. It's not critical infrastructure. Vital facilities. Assist in notification and warning of the general public. Provide security of homes, businesses, and property in damaged and or evacuated areas. So basically they're going to kick out all the people, get rid of them one way or the other, and then they're going to send in their little thugs, their corporate thugs, to be security guards. That's what these people are intended for. They're intended to work as security forces, a occupational armed force. Public health, food and water inspection, sanitation and vector inspections of shelters, environmental health regulation enforcement. I think we're pretty familiar with that crap today. Preventative public health include preventative health services, including control of communicable diseases. Yes, we all know about that. Clinical and immunization services, also know about that. Establish isolation and quarantine as warranted, know about that. Sanitation, inspection, enforcement. We're all very familiar with that stuff because of the treason they tried to implement during the so-called COVID era. Engineering/public works. This is what we're currently dealing with today. Support traffic control measures, providing signage, detours, and barricades. Safety inspections, so those are your roadblocks, roads and bridges. Like I said, roadblocks. So that's the crap that we're going on with their undercover vehicle control points under the guise of public works road construction. Utilities, priority restoration of service to vital facilities. There's that word again, vital facilities. Provide emergency power as required. Yes, of course. See, they control it, and they're going to use it. And in the majority, that means against us. Ensure the safe transfer of patients from incidents involving contamination of any kind. That's emergency medical services. So, like I said, they can just declare it, and therefore it's so. And if you don't go along with it, then you are involved in civil disturbance. And that's their little word game. American Red Cross is arranged for the mass feeding and other appropriate support. Who says that? Mass feeding. It's so creepy. It sounds like they're talking about livestock. Mass feeding. Provide mobile canteen feeding service to emergency service workers during events expected to last for an extended time. This is important because the mobile canteen service was the term used during World War II for supplies sent to service members engaged in combat operations. That's important. The canteen was set up by the Salvation Army and other groups like that, specifically designed to support military operations. So they're using the word mobile canteen service, mobile canteen feeding service, which is worse, essentially in the same capacity. They intend to engage in wide-scale operations of warfare against the people with the desire of controlling and conquering and occupying what they consider to be their property, the community. Provide blood and blood products. It's kind of creepy. Provide information regarding the location of those sheltered according to ARC policy. Oh, now why would they want that information? Yes, because they collect all these people up into shelters and then they conveniently have them all succumb to some type of catastrophic event. Kill them all, basically. Report to COTS HIL hospital status when requested. Legal. Interpret emergency laws and regulations. So yeah, basically figure out how to explain why what we're doing is not what we're doing, and we're not liable for anything that we're doing, essentially. Advise officials and department heads on record-keeping requirements and other documentation necessary for the exercising of emergency power. Lovely. County coroner establish a temporary morgue and or other processing facilities. What are other processing facilities administered by a coroner? Food for thought. Finance and budget purchasing. Local jurisdiction and agencies maintain records of financial transactions and purchases that deviate from normal procedures during a disaster. So that sounds like they want to spy on everybody's financial records because you're quote-unquote not spending according to normal procedures during a disaster. Develop and utilize emergency procedures for procurement and delivery of essential resources and supplies for emergency situations. So I assume a lot of that involves theft. School districts provide shelter facilities per agreement with the American Red Cross. So the facilities are going to be provided at schools. And that's no surprise because you think about schools, they're well fortified. They are constantly monitored. The people who operate them are brainwashed to the extent of lunacy, where they would literally walk to their own death if they were told to do so. Schools are the perfect facilities to be used for these types of undercover combat operations. Coordinate evacuation and transportation operations for students during emergency situations. So, of course, acquire control over the children. That's a primary motive for these people. And the Central Ohio Transit Authority, COTA, will serve as the lead agency for transportation of people in an emergency. Yeah, because that's what that was intended for, is for them to hijack it and use it for their occupational purposes. Oh, God. Ohio Department of Health uses coordinate a lot in their description and also includes surveillance. Interesting. The State Highway Patrol's primary function is to provide support. The State Highway Patrol's primary response function is to provide support to other state and local law enforcement agencies. Generally, the support consists of information gathering and dissemination. Yes, I think we know what that means. Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, the PUCO, will assist if possible in the dispatch transfer of strategic supplies to an incident area. Ohio Department of Transportation's primary response function is to provide support in the form of information, equipment, and area control related to highways, bridges, and aviation and mass transportation facilities. We're already seeing that build up right now. ODOT personnel respond to the off-site incident command post and provide traffic assistance and information. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources respond to the off-site incident command post and perform assessment and provide information and resources, including providing land and facilities for use as needed. So all of that public land, quote unquote, is all going to be leveraged and used against us so that these people can essentially hide bases of operations out there wherever they want and leverage control over the entire region. So here's the big one. Franklin County Emergency Operations Center. FCEOC. That's a Fox, Charlie, Echo, Oscar, Charlie. Franklin County Emergency Operations Center is a facility which provides an environment in which county officials and representatives from other agencies can provide centralized direction and control, planning functions, and communications during a major disaster. The FCEOC is the focal point for the coordination of support functions, resources, logistics, personnel planning during an event. That's the command center, right? Probably at some type of school somewhere. The FCEOC may be staffed for a variety of reasons, including support of a large single discipline event, support of a municipality, or support of an event affecting multiple areas of the county. The decision to activate is the responsibility of the director of Fairfield County Emergency Management and Homeland Security or his or her designee. Activation may be requested by jurisdiction CEOs, fire and police chiefs, and other officials through the decision to officially activate the FCEOC rests with the FCEM and HS director. Each event is unique and will have specific needs of the FCEOC. The FCEOC operates 24/7, 365 days a year and is a scalable resource. Only those groups needed during a particular event need to be contacted. These personnel will be notified via call-down list or other pre-identified procedures. Staff of the FCEMHS will be the initial reporting staff to the FCEOC and will have direct coordination with Incident Command. Establish priorities between incidents and area commands in concert with the incident commander. This stuff is so military. This is a military occupation. This is a standing army, and all of these things are particularly prohibited in the U.S. Constitution, but they're not constitutional. So having the argument about them violating the Constitution in the sense of having a standing army assumes or presumes that these are constitutional elements. They are not. They are enemies of the U.S. Constitution. And the only mechanism with which we have left to combat them are the oaths of enlistment and commission with the U.S. Armed Forces, which is the reason why the Department of Homeland Security is attempting to do away with all military resources and establish a global law enforcement occupation military under the cover of emergencies. Information collection, evaluation, and display. Data and resource information requirements in the FCEOC will vary with the type and scope of the disaster involved, the number and size of jurisdictions affected, and available resources. Timely, accurate information must come into the FCEOC for use in decision making. The information will be analyzed for potential problems and take action requests with the results posted. So yeah, basically just like any military operation, the intelligence aspect of it will be within the command center. That's very common. Of course, you have intelligence components which attach to field command units and people actually out there, and also you have intelligence assets that go out to the front, etc. Those types of things. The next part we'll go to is 49. The FCEM and HS Resource Database, Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security, maintains a resource list that is updated on an as-needed basis. It is checked in its entirety for accuracy once per year. This database contains public and private resources. Private resources contained in this database are asked to sign a resource agreement. These agreements are not binding contracts. They are a statement of willingness to assist in a provision of inventory and 24-hour contact information. Agreements are on file in the FCEOC. These agreements are only completed for private resources. Resources are solicited via the FCEM and HS website and through the gap analysis process. Once the gap is identified, FCEM and HS will solicit companies with needed capabilities to join the database. Mutual aid agreements. There are many pre-existing mutual aid agreements throughout the county joining the resources of various agencies. These can be called upon on a daily basis or during emergencies. See ESF number 7, Resource Support and Logistics, for a listing specific agreements in place. The State Resource Database, FCEM and HS initiated a pilot program with OEMA, that's the Ohio Emergency Management Agency, to share resources across Homeland Security Region 4. This web-based program allows resources that may be available regionally to be displayed online for use in emergency situations. The database was originally intended to ensure the appropriate usage of regional resources purchased with federal grant dollars, but is capable of displaying locally owned resources as well. This allows Franklin County to have access to resources the county may not otherwise have and share regional resources housed here with other counties. The Law Enforcement Response Plan. LERP is a tool for local law enforcement agencies to acquire large quantities of law enforcement resources in response to other emergencies. It's interesting that they always love this word other. A law enforcement automated data system, or LEADS, that is currently the system used for warrants, so-called arrest warrants, search warrants, that type of stuff. They do it on LEADS. The rest is really just not necessary to what we're doing here. So the next thing we're going to go to is page 72. Aha, here we are. on page 72, we get critical infrastructure. Remember, not vital facilities. That list is not on here. Community includes airports, school bus lots, schools, entertainment, shopping centers, community recreation centers, Somali community centers, golf courses, and parks. Critical infrastructure lists water treatment plants, source water intakes, source water wells, dams, waste management, electrical substations, high voltage transmission lines, major pipelines, alternative fuel locations, and underground fuel tanks. Yes, they know what they're doing. They know what they want to control, shut down, and ensure that everyone else is starved out and that they can solidify occupation under the guise of emergency management in a disaster. Warning system, notice it's not emergency. Notice the term emergency management. They create the emergency, they manage the emergency, and we're the ones that take the fall because we blindly and foolishly believed that what they were doing was for our benefit. Interestingly, under warning systems, it lists ODOT traffic cameras. How is a traffic camera a warning system? Everything else on that list makes sense. Sirens, billboards, etc. But a camera? How do you warn someone with a camera? What and to whom are they warning? That's the question. So as the saying goes, make it make sense. Well, the simple reason for why the traffic cameras are listed as warning systems is because the warnings are not for us. They're not for drivers. They're warning the people in these this structure, essentially, of imminent attack from us. They're warning the people involved in this stuff against us. That's what the traffic cameras are for, as far as a warning system. Now, there's a few parts in this document which are blacked out. And before I go further, I would like to mention that one of the things we haven't seen as a major disaster event yet, but is likely coming, are dam failures. Because, of course, reduce upkeep of dams, and the dams will blow, and thus you have a natural emergency. A lot of this stuff in our system requires constant upkeep on purpose so that they can reduce the staffing, take away the funding, and ensure that the whole area degrades to the point that it creates the intended disaster. Now, there's the redacted sections we have here. Capabilities assessment and key target capabilities assessed on page 13. Also on page 14 we have initial notification. That's been redacted. And quite a lot. And that continues on to page 15. Also on page 26 we have a redacted section under critical infrastructure key resources. All these headlines, of course, are very indicative of what's redacted and why. It's, as you would say, self-explanatory, right? Okay. And then the last section that's been redacted is on page 46, disaster intelligence. What a surprise. Now, why would you want to redact all of those sections? I wonder. I'm being sarcastic, of course. Now, along the listing on this document of people involved, we have a roster of all the usual, all of those stooges and other people like that. They're not really important. Now, the people here listed on this are likely, no longer applicable, likely. Considering it says it was revised in 2011. But it's hard to say. I mean, you don't know how many of these people are still involved in things or whatnot. And they would be useful as strings to pull on for research purposes. However, the one thing that I would say is that all the names on this list are going to be stooges or tools, order takers, if you were, not creative bureaucrats. But there's some important elements to note on here about the roster of names. The first is the DSCC-IF. DSCC stands for the Defense Supply Center Columbus. The Defense Supply Center Columbus lists Chief Kenneth Pence, and for the Office of Public Safety, Michael J. Wood, Installation Emergency Manager. And the Defense Supply Center Columbus is allegedly is a facility of the Defense Logistics Agency, which are involved in all kinds of treason. Now, when we get to the Franklin County Emergency Management and Homeland Security, we have quite a few names on here. A Mr. Darrell Kober, Deputy Director, and a Michael R. Pennell, Director. Mark D. Anthony, Public Affairs Officer. Ian Dunn, GIS Coordinator. Susan Henry, Office Manager. Krista Hook, Contractor. That's an interesting title, just contractor. I wonder. Michael J. Keefe, Operations and Planning Manager. Pam Tickle, Training/Grants Manager. John G. Walsh, Warning Systems Program Manager. Christopher M. Williams, Community Emergency Response Team, CERT Coordinator. Jan Bartel, Finance Manager. So I believe the Community Emergency Response Team is going to include things like SWAT and stuff, like the special weapons and tactics type of concept of you get a whole bunch of thugs together and a bunch of equipment that go around and do a showy show of force type of deal to keep people afraid. Planning and Recovery Manager, Jamie Stout. I don't know if I said Jan or Jan Bartel, Finance Manager, but there he is. There's that guy. Here's a Miss Kathy Crandall, Director of Franklin County Homeland Security and Justice Programs. So that sounds like a separate one. William Stump, Security Manager for the Franklin County Juvenile Detention. Doesn't say Franklin County Juvenile Detention Center, mind you. It just says Franklin County Juvenile Detention. Pretty odd. And there's, of course, the Franklin County Public Health, Sheriff, the usual sort of paycheck jockey type of traders, nimwits who are just I'm doing my job type of people, and they're all replaceable. That's the important thing to note about this. All of these people are replaceable. There's just some very strange elements to this roster. At the top, you have a Miss Tanya Kraft, Director, American Red Cross, ARC, A-R-C, Emergency Services, and a Mr. Gene Rowe, Director of Battelle, Corporate Operations Emergency Management. Why Battelle? Of course, if you see how many places in Franklin County are run by Battelle, it would be very obvious. Now, the important thing to note here is that this is an example. It's one example of the types of activities going on across the entire country. You have the so-called Department of Homeland Security with all of these subset county, region, and state structures, which mirror what comes from the Department of Homeland Security, or came from, but effectively operate in their own capacities, and they present the guise of working together, when in actuality most of it is simply a front. The important thing to note here is that these manuals are specifically in coded language explaining the operational components and measures with which they are going to conduct and carry out their treasonous military operations against the people under the guise of disaster response and emergency management. At this point, we all know this stuff by now. The only people who don't know it are so deluded to the extent that a guy comes up trying to stab them, and they will continue trying to hug that person trying to stab them, saying, "You're my friend, why are you trying to kill me?" Those people don't even warrant. There is no rationality, there's no logic, there's no cognitive processing going on there. Those people aren't worthwhile. The other types of people at this point say, okay, I've had people come to my house and harass me constantly. I cut my tree down. I had a tree up, and some guy from the city came over and yelled at me and told me he was going to find me and traipse around on my property and broke stuff. So I cut my tree down, and then another guy from the city came and then told me he was going to find me, etc. Right? And then all this construction and they're driving businesses out of town. They're raising taxes everywhere. They're, just about all people today, except for those few who are deluded to the extent of trying to hug someone trying to kill them, those people accept today, okay, people in the so-called government are not my friends. At least you have a foundation to start from. They come to the recognition that the person working the front desk at the DMV or at the tax office or whatever are not their friends. They are not there to help them. That is an important recognition to be made by those in the public population. From there, it is a little bit of a long step to the people working in the tax office, in the Public Works Administration office, in the post office, in all of these places are active traitors. They are actually out to get us. Not necessarily to a full volition extent of the people working there, because a lot of those people working there will always say something like, I'm just doing my job, it's so-called policy and whatnot. They always try to hide behind those types of excuses. The fact that they're presenting excuses, of course, shows that they don't really like what they're doing, right? The people ultimately making decisions of ultimate willfulness and volition like to hide behind layers of these ignorant. I call it the army of the ignorant. They unleash a horde of stupidity, ignorance, and brainlessness onto the population and attempt to force you or beat you down by the fact that if you go out and argue with someone, sure, you might win the argument, but you're going to have to argue with everybody, right? You go into a restaurant and you win an argument. Well, the next day when you go into the grocery store, it's the person there is word for word saying the same thing as that other person you argue with for 2 hours, right? And they'll beat you down, wear you down, and make you accept absurdities simply out of the fact that you want to live life. That is one of their primary tactics. The other one, of course, is lying. That's what this is. This type of stuff is just simply lying. And more importantly, it's attempting to leverage all of these things that have been in place under one pretense for a different purpose. And we just read what that purpose actually is. Thank you.